Well, good morning. Welcome, everybody, to Victor Valley College Communication Studies. We call this a book review. I'm Greg Jones, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies here at Victor Valley College. And let me begin by welcoming our guest of honor, Rika Goh. She's author of Adultery is Universal, but I'm Getting Married Anyway, What to Know Before You Do or Already Have. She is a practicing licensed marriage and family therapist for more than 20 years, who has hosted shows for both radio and television. Dr. Gold is the owner of Clear Transitions Life and Wellness Coaching, a college communication studies instructor and a provider for the Board of Behavioral Science, authoring continuing education courses to mental health professionals. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm VVC welcome to Dr. Rika Gold.
Thank you. Very nice.
Welcome. How are you?
I am fine, Greg. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. I want to start with a few statistics that I'm sure you're aware of. 53% of marriages divorce, 57% of men and 54% of women admit to infidelity, and 74% of men and 68% of women would if they could. So even those who aren't are saying they would if they thought they could get away with it, according to the statistics that you provided. I'm going to be honest with you, though. There are quite a few folks in this room who have read your book, and they have responded in writing to me, and some of them don't like you.
I understand that.
To use a metaphor, it's kind of like, you know, we're all teenagers having a great time, and you just showed up at the house as a parent. You turned the lights on, turned the music off, and you're just kind of a party pooper, if you know what I'm saying. So what motivated you to do this research and write this book?
Well, to begin with, it actually came from a lot of students like yourselves, where there were many, many students in my family communication classes, not to mention in private practice, who basically had issues having to do with their relationships. A lot of times it came out of pain, or it came out of hurt, or it came out of anger. Other times it was because people had trust issues that were happening in their relationships. What motivated me to write it was that I always wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what to write a book about. And when I started looking into it, one of the things that I learned was that you write what you know about. Well, my background being a marriage and family therapist and then teaching family communication classes, it was really natural for me because I had a lot of information about marriages to begin with. The motivation to do it just kind of came about as just a desire. I guess because I have a keen desire to just keep on doing different things in my life. And because of that, that was an area that was very interesting to me. And when I thought about writing the book, I thought about the only thing that I had written outside of articles for newspapers and magazines was a master's thesis. And it seemed like it would be very easy to write a book like this that was a resource book that people could use.
Did you, I know some of the questions that my students that have read the book were concerned with your, I guess, your perspective from, like, where was she coming from to begin with? And you and I know that research can be slanted, yes, depending on the researcher's biases. What let me ask you this, did you begin with a title and then work from there, or did you begin with, how did the title come about?
The title came about because I was just trying to think of what to come up with as a title. As most of you know, the topic of infidelity is in the media all over. You can hardly not read about it in the newspaper. You see it on the internet. You see it in movies. You see it in magazines. You see it in shows like Cheaters. People are familiar with this topic, and it's abundantly clear that it's all over. To come up with the title, one of the things that I had done in writing a book, since I'd never written a book, and having a private practice in Clear Transitions, it all tied in. The idea of this type of book tied in with the work that I was doing in coaching. And so I took a program called Mission Marketing Mentors because I didn't know anything about how to go about setting up a book, preparing to write a book, or how to market it afterwards. And I learned many, many things about how you needed to promote your book or get your book out there in the first place. So one of the key things was you had to come up with a catchy title. And you had to come up with a byline or a secondary title that sort of explained what the book was about. So what worked effectively for me was to use this particular topic simply because adultery is universal. It's been around forever. It's all over in every country, every culture, everywhere in the world. This topic is present, or adultery or infidelity is present. So that seemed like a very good topic to come up with in the beginning. And then one of the things that I also learned in marketing the book is that when a person picks up a book, this is what they do. They have, from what research shows us, about 7 seconds that you look at the cover. After you've looked at the cover for 7 seconds, you usually turn it over. If there's something of interest on the back, you might read a little bit of it. You're very fortunate if somebody opens it up to look at the table of contents and see what the book is actually about. So part of what's involved in writing a book, especially a book that's a nonfiction book, is marketing. And so that's how I started. I started with this before I started with just going out and looking for information.
Okay, and I think that's an important idea. In other words, were you open to discover what the research presented, or did you go in search of research to support what you already thought to be true?
I think that's a really good question, especially for students to think about, because it is very, very easy to think, oh, I believe such and such is true, and then just research that information and not look up anything that's counter to that. So my answer to that is that, first of all, I knew a lot of the research already because I had been doing it for years. But I was interested in finding the most recent research. I was interested in checking the dates on the research, especially that I got from the internet. And I wanted it to come from a whole bunch of different sources. That's why in the book I do talk about sacred marriage. I do talk about alternative forms of couples getting together. Of course, I talk about cybersex. It's very present in today's time. Wasn't before. So there were many, many things that I had to research in order to know more about. Even the chapter on gays and lesbians, I happen to be a straight person, so I didn't have that information. I needed help with that.
You do talk about sex quite a bit in the book. In fact, some of it's a little steamy, if you know what I'm saying. And those of you who have read it know what I'm talking about, right? So I'm curious. In fact, I just want to read a little bit. This is the story of Lance and Stacy, which I've edited out most of. But basically, Lance and Stacy are co-workers, and they become involved. Lance, however, is on the verge of getting married, right? And so he's engaged to be married, and Stacy is already married. And this affair had begun easily and was lustful and passionate, you write. Then you say some other things, and then you say sex was amazing, and the emotional intimacy grew. 6 weeks passed, and after all this, Lance's fiancée invited Stacy and her husband to the wedding at Lance's request. I mean, it sounds straight out of fiction, and so one question is, are these based on real accounts?
Well, when you say, is this straight out of fiction, it is straight out of fiction because all of the stories are fiction.
Okay.
There are 2 of these scenarios that I use. First of all, let me say that I put the scenarios in for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons was to basically illustrate certain points that I cover in the text itself. Another reason is that when you're reading a nonfiction book, let's face it, guys, this is not the kind of book that you get a cup of hot chocolate, get in front of the fire, curl up with a blanket, and have a good read for the night. Okay, you have to be interested in this area or have some kind of issues going on that you want information about to read this book. So I put the stories in, or the scenarios in, not only to illustrate, but also to keep people reading, because people like to read about things like this. It's interesting to them. It's kind of intriguing. In fact, there was a gentleman that I know that he bought the book, And then he came back to me, and it was kind of funny, and he said, you know, he said, I started to read the book, but he said, after I read the first scenario, I thought that was really good. So I just read all the scenarios in the book and didn't read any of the material in between. So it is to pique interest. It's also to keep the reader going, to draw them, so there's a marketing aspect to having it in there as well.
But how realistic are these type of accounts? I mean, in your 20-plus years of practice, I guess you've heard these stories of adultery, but I mean, is this outlandish, or is this?
No, that's not outlandish at all. Nothing that was in there was outlandish, because all of the stories have at least a piece or a part of something that I've heard from somebody else, not necessarily a client. Could have been told to me by a friend or an associate, or someone passed it on to me. 2 of the stories are actually real, and they were given to me by people who gave me permission to be able to put the stories in. Even then, I changed some of the events, some of the outcomes, and made it more fictionalized because I thought it read better.
In your years of practice, what issues related to marriage and adultery did you find most troubling? I guess as a therapist, to hear or to try to help people work through.
Oh, do you mean that affected me?
Perhaps, yeah.
Oh, nothing affects me.
Okay, all right.
And I say that because I'll just mention that when I first went into private practice, I was not licensed as a therapist. I was a clinical hypnotherapist, and it's one of the reasons why I went ahead and got licensed as a therapist. And that was because I started out by putting advertisements in the Penny Saver. This was in another city, and all of the people who came to me were pretty much psychotic, and so. I'm not saying that everybody reads Penny Saver is psychotic, but I can tell you that people came to me were pretty psychotic. And one of the first clients that I had was somebody who used to ride with a motorcycle gang, and she had seen a beheading. And she had nightmares about this, and she wanted to use hypnosis to get rid of these images that she had. And I just thought, there is no way I am prepared to do this, you know, without having a stronger psychological background and getting licensed. So I went ahead and I got licensed. So coming back to your question, that's one of the reasons why things don't affect me, because there's very little that I haven't heard, you know, at one time or the other. In terms of troubling clients or different kinds of things like that, often when people come in for marital counseling, for example, it's usually one person from the couple. And that person will come in because they are unhappy with the relationship. Many times it's hard to get the partner to come in because the partner will feel like there's nothing wrong with me, it's your problem, so you go in and handle it. Other times, especially in today's time, like a lot of you who are younger probably feel like, hey, you know, if my partner has a problem, then I have a problem too, so I'm going to participate in this counseling. But often people would come in, and one of the chief complaints that would be presented would be men would come in and say they just weren't having enough sex. They just didn't have enough sex in the relationship. And women would come in and say, I'd be happy if we didn't ever have to have sex again. So these things would kind of present some problems. Also, when you have 2 people in a couple and there is a problem in the relationship, they often don't want to reveal all of their feelings in front of the spouse. So what will happen is that you need to call in one person at a time, first of all, to get where they're coming from. And then you need to mold that as a therapist in such a way that it does come out and it is revealed so they can talk about it. Many times when the issue was about sexuality, it wasn't really about sexuality at all. It was about communication. It was about the need to be able to communicate more effectively and express what it is they needed to express. And a lot of times they didn't know how. So.
Right. You obviously spent some time researching the book. About how much time?
It took me 2 years to write the book.
Okay. Did anything surprise you? Obviously, you had some experience. You've been teaching communication studies. Any research surprise you? Research findings?
I didn't know a lot about the cybersex issue, and so some of the things, some of the voyeuristic things, some of the use of avatars for sexuality, and I'm trying to remember the name of some of them. I haven't read this book in 2 years, so Tiny Sex, and I don't. Some of you may know the names to it. Anyway, I don't know the names of it too. But some of those things were a little bit surprising to me. But I would say that most of the information was not surprising. One thing that I recall is that when during war times, when soldiers went away, some of the information I gathered was that soldiers felt like it was okay for them to have sex outside of the relationship because they didn't know if they were going to be around the next day. So many men felt like having affairs while they were overseas or while they were in another country was certainly okay. Now again, we're talking about earlier times like World War II and the Korean War, because today it's a lot easier for soldiers to be able to communicate with their families. But in those times it wasn't, so there would be long periods of time when spouses would not hear anything. By the same token, women at home very often got involved with someone because they were lonely, because they needed company, and if there was a man around, you know, then affairs were likely to happen. So that was something that was surprising to me. I think I read something else in here too, but I don't remember what it is.
Yeah. Who was this book for? I mean, is this something you say what to know before you do or already have. So, yeah. Is this something everyone should read? Why not?
I don't think children should read it.
I don't think children should read it either.
But yes, I think it's for all ages of young adults and forward, because first of all, many times, you know, how many of you are in a relationship, in an intimate relationship? Okay, quite a few of you. So by nature, a lot of times when you come together, if you're not coming together online first, okay, and you just met somebody somewhere and you start up a relationship, very often the relationship will escalate to intimacy fairly quickly. It's not like we're in the old-fashioned courting days, you know, where there was always a chaperone or something like that, or it was inappropriate, you know, to have sex. Although today there are some people who believe that you don't have sex before you get married. But we have a lot of cohabiting today. So many people are sexual early in the relationship. When you have this kind of a situation, you get to know, well, for example, online, you get to know that person better. First of all, because you're talking and you're visiting, and then when you get together with that person, you may already know a lot about that person, and then intimacy happens afterwards. And I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question to me before I get off track there?
Yeah, it's just something everybody should read.
Thank you.
Why not?
Yes. Before you get married, a lot of times some of the issues that you may not like about the person because you have a high about the person, you feel good about that person, you may be anticipating marriage, you don't want anything to interfere with that, you want to be on a real positive note. So many young couples do not take the time to really look at the things that might bother them. We tend to sweep that underneath the carpet and not look at it because we don't want to be bothered by it. So then we find it out after we get married. And so often what will happen for those people who are already married is that they begin to drift apart. Many people become like roommates. And then there are so many reasons, which those of you who've read the book know, why people have affairs. I mean, it can happen very innocently. It can be something that you didn't prepare for. Remember the movie, it was with Michael Douglas and Susan.
Fatal Attraction?
Yes, Fatal Attraction. Okay, remember in that particular movie, this is a very happily married man. In fact, many of the movies show very happily married people. And somebody, you know, another woman he meets in a meeting at work, comes on to him. She's very attractive, she's very aggressive, she's very forward, and they end up having sex like, I don't know, on a sink in a room or something like that. And, you know, and it's just like, it's there. And that's where the biological aspect comes in there too, because that's a very powerful, powerful kind of thing for people. And so you can have any number of reasons why a person will get involved with another person. I haven't addressed the issue yet, and I'm sure that Greg will bring it up, but that has to do with character. It's not to say that anybody and everybody would have an affair or would be unfaithful to their partner. A lot of it has to do with character. It has to do with your sense of loyalty. It has to do with your honesty. It has to do with your integrity. your belief system. Okay, so many people, in fact, when I first wrote the book, before it was published, I sent out sections of the book to different people who I knew, men and women alike, to get feedback from them. And I remember there was a very good friend of mine, a male, who wrote back to me who said, I thought the writing was great, but I sure hope that people don't do this. I would never do this. Okay, so some people just feel like that this is not for me, you know, and I wouldn't do it. Even though people say that, sometimes they do. You know.
Well, my wife, for example, won't read your book.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, she won't even walk in the same room that has your book. It's not that bad, but I do think that it's a subject that reminds her of something that is negative that happened in her family, and I get the sense from a lot of the readers here as well that it's something. Isn't there something good about keeping our head in the sand and just not accepting these? I mean, the numbers don't lie, and at the same time, do you want to focus on it or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can bring up. I'll bring up a very good friend, my closest friend. She will not go to any movies that are action movies or that deal with murder in any way. And sometimes, you know, there's some really good action films which are out, or suspense films which are out. And I'll say to her, you want to go and see such and such? She'll say no. And I accuse her of liking to watch bubblegum movies because everything that she watches is happy, happy romance movies. That's all she wants to have. From a psychological perspective, people will do this for reasons like you just mentioned, Greg. You have an incident or something that happened in your family that is unhappy for you, or you're frightened by it, or it makes you nervous, or you just don't want that negativity. There may be a sensitivity that you have. There's a lot of negativity in our lives today and in our world, and you may feel like, you know what, I just don't need that. I don't need it, I don't want it, I don't want to read it, I want to just kind of stay where I am. For some people, there is an element of denial. In other words, it's frightening, it's scary, I don't want to believe that could ever happen, so I'm just not even going to let that anywhere near me. I don't want it tainting my thinking. And so there are different reasons like that. So yes, you know, that's why any kind of resource book like this about a topic, if you don't want to read it, you don't want to read it. Let me give you an example. 50 Shades of Grey. Has anybody read it? Okay. Probably about another 10 people that are in the room read it but don't want to put their hand up. So 50 Shades of Grey, okay, it's about sex. The whole book is about sex. There's 3 of them. It's a trilogy. Okay, it's not something that everybody wants to pick up or wants to read because it's about dominance and submission in sexuality. Not everybody wants to hear about that, you know, or read about that. It's a little scary for people. Sadomasochism, that's scary.
Right. Well, I mean, maybe it's fair to say that this isn't a book that you could have written 20 years ago, perhaps. I don't know if that's true, but in your opinion, as a society, are we becoming more enlightened about this subject and more willing to talk about it?
I think so. Especially, I think, among college students. Because I teach family communication online, and that's one of the differences. How many of you have had an online class? Okay, a lot of you. When you're doing a class online, it's very different from a class in person. So if a topic like sexuality comes up, which in the family communication class it does, you're anonymous. Okay, maybe you have a picture online, maybe you don't. Greg was asking me if I would recognize any of my students. I wouldn't, you know, because sometimes they put up, you know, Daffy Duck as their picture on their homepage. So I don't know what the people look like, and so people can remain pretty anonymous. So they're very open and very honest about talking about this. All kinds of things come up, and people reveal all kinds of information, and not just online, because I've been teaching family communication at this college since the year 2000, and in the beginning I taught a lot of classes right here in person, and people in the group settings talk about everything. So yes, it's, you know, like I said, it's in the media, it's in the news. That was one of the things that surprised me. I was trying to remember, was reading about how many presidents have had affairs and to what extent, and how their employees helped them, you know, to get away with this and keep it from the public. It was really, really interesting. So that if President Obama had an affair today, we might be a little bit shocked, but we'd almost kind of be sort of callous to it, you know, because we've heard so much of this. So,
I think Michelle
yes.
would kick his ass.
I think so too.
You describe a situation, our situation, in one which I'm not sure where this question comes from. The continuing emergence of women as equal in rights to men has played a role in contributing to greater numbers of those engaged in extramarital sex. This seems like food for the argument that the pro-family arguments that would limit the rights of women, that women in the workplace is a bad idea for the family, that women having equal rights is destroying the family structure, being more infidelity. How would you respond to that?
I think that was a great question. Whoever came up with it, I thought it was a really, really good question, because after I had written the book and I looked at it and I thought, wow, you know, the emergence of women, the evolution of women coming into power, being able to have equality with men, certainly allowed women to begin to have more affairs also. It used to be tilted, those statistics, where it was far more men that were having affairs than it was women. Now it's pretty much equal. And so in answer to that question, my first response is no. It's not that saving traditional marriage is going to keep women from having equal rights or being equal to men, because if they are equal, then it's going to destroy the marital, you know, couple situation. It will make marriage very difficult. It's the other way around. Women's rights, women being equal, that's not going anywhere. If anything, that's emerging and becoming stronger. So as a result of that, I think that is going to have an impact on traditional marriage, so that we're going to, as a society, at least if things hold true from where they were when I wrote the book, which was, you know, I only published it last year. So what you're going to see is that either traditional marriage itself is going to become somewhat obsolete, or there are going to be a lot of variations of couples together, whether that's cohabiting instead of getting married. I mean, look at it. There are a lot of women today don't want to have children until after they establish their careers or go through school. There are a lot of couples today that decide we're not going to have kids at all. We want to have our life. We want to have more money. We want to be able to have fun, have a good time, do the things we want to. Let's not have any kids at all. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes in what we regard as being the traditional marriage, and rather than, I think that's going to be affected rather than the rights of women.
We have 4 questioners from various groups in our family communication studies class, so I'm going to ask one of them to come up right now to the microphone. And I think not everybody at once, just yeah, careful there. And then we'll let that person complete his or her questions before the next person. I think that'll facilitate the process. So anyway, pick a number. Yeah, go ahead, move toward the mic. And what is your first question for Dr. Gold?
Do you have any personal experience with cheating or being cheated on?
Oh, what a nice question, and everybody always asks that.
see, and I think that's everyone wants to. Okay, what happened to her? Did she wake up one morning and, you know?
Yeah, in fact, many times when I've spoken to different groups, people like to come out and say, is any of this an autobiography? No, it's not. To my knowledge, I have never been cheated upon, nor have I cheated. That's all I can say about that.
Okay. And how can I follow up on that?
Sure.
How'd your husband feel about when he found out you were writing this book?
Actually, he felt fine about it. He had no problem with it at all, but he used to go, do I have to listen to another chapter? I do it like in the morning over coffee. Oh, I wrote another chapter. Let me read this chapter to you while we're having coffee. You know, and he was very patient.
All right, next question.
Is there anything proven to prevent someone from cheating, or is it simply communication?
Well,
prevention.
A lot of you are probably too young for this, but I was going to say the Mrs. Bobbitt effect. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
I haven't a clue.
Mrs. Bobbitt, the woman who cut her husband's penis off.
Oh. Okay.
Chastity belt, open marriage, multiple marriages, being celibate. No, I don't think there's any information. I actually researched that, to kind of look for it. About the only thing I can say is that if you go to a counselor, especially a counselor whose belief system is that, who takes a very strong position that infidelity is morally wrong, then that individual will probably give you different kinds of suggestions with regard to how you might have a better relationship or how you could have more open communication. But is there a proven way to prevent it? No.
Well, a quick follow-up on that. I mean, what about religious circles? Are they less likely to cheat? When we laughed during, he's shaking his head, during one of my lectures, student, Mr. Carson and I were laughing because the Catholic girls where I grew up were the easiest ones to get. So, I mean, but is there a community? Do you see less problems?
I don't necessarily, as far as the research goes, I don't see necessarily less problem with infidelity. But I will say that with arranged marriages and with sacred marriages, that people enter into the relationship with a different take on marriage, perhaps, that perhaps people who are non-religious do. And so because there may be a belief system that God put this relationship together, and therefore we should do everything that we can to keep it together, there may be that kind of a component. But I mean, we've all seen people who are in the clergy, who have had affairs. There's all kinds of information about it. Lots of movies and media about that too. So I haven't seen any clear-cut statistics that show that anybody tied with a religion is immune to infidelity.
Well said.
The other two questions were answered.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, and we'll have the next person come on down, and once you've reached your last question, go ahead and sit down. That way the next person will know they're up. What do you got?
First question is, how do you recover from a spouse cheating and having a baby from that affair?
Ooh, good question.
Recovery from cheating and a child. Okay.
Yeah, I think you guys are not stepping quite close enough to the mic, because I don't know if they're picking that up on the film.
You okay, Tim? Yeah, he's fine.
Okay, good. First of all, any kind of recovery, whether there's a baby or whether there's not a baby, and then I'll come back to that, is when that does happen, if it's discovered, and with a baby it's probably going to be discovered, but not always. Look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, So when it is discovered, then the first course of action, of course, is between the couple. There should be open communication about that if you are going to try to preserve the relationship. And I think in more sophisticated couples that there probably is, or couples that aren't emotionally damaged in some other way, there probably is that good communication. Very often, that couple, no matter how intelligent or educated they are, will go to a counselor, will go to a therapist to be able to work it out. And therapists who specialize in that particular area are the best ones to actually go to, because they're the ones who have the most information. That is not to say that every counselor or every therapist is excellent or the best. You have to, if you're going to go to a professional, you need to go to someone you feel very comfortable with and who fits with you, fits with your belief system, fits with, how you want to work on that. So it needs to be discussed and it needs to be talked about. Sometimes it never gets that far, though, because one partner will say, even without the baby, will say, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here. So it never comes to a discussion. With a baby, now you've got a whole different situation, because now you've got a child to consider, and that child's life that has to be considered. So again, it comes back to character a lot. Whoever let's say the mistress has the baby, let's say it's a male who commits the infidelity, and it's the mistress that has the baby. That person might talk. That person might say something. Look at John Edwards and his mistress at the time who had a baby. He totally denied that the child was his child. Okay, and people will do that because they're motivated by other things. In his case, he was politically motivated to stay where he was and have the power that he had. But a child, you're bringing a child into the world, there's a real need to protect that child and allow that child to perhaps have the benefit of the father. So there are different things that could be done, and again, it comes back to what the couple is willing to do. Sometimes the wife of the husband, they'll stay together, and for various reasons, that woman might take this child into their family. Like let's say that the woman who had the baby leaves the baby or neglects the baby or something, might take the child over. Other times, that person is a single mom and basically takes care of the child and never gets together with the husband. There's all kinds of scenarios that could happen as a result of that.
Oh, okay. Next question. Do you feel that every marriage, one partner is prone to cheating?
No.
No.
I don't think anybody is necessarily prone to cheating. I think a lot of times having an affair just happens because it happens.
So there's no special formula to it or nothing?
No.
And then do young adults today have a different perspective regarding to external marital sex?
Yes, they do. I think that there are many young couples today that will experiment with having another partner in the relationship occasionally. Okay, some will experiment with having emotional intimacy, but not necessarily putting constraints on the physical aspect of the relationship. We have teenagers and high school kids that basically are friends with benefits. So, and let me just make a comment about that a little bit, because that's a younger group of people where many people who are in high school will feel like oral sex, for example, is not really sex. They don't consider that to be cheating or to be unfair or anything like that.
I think Bill Clinton made that clear, right? Sorry.
And he wasn't that young.
Right.
So but yes, and people, younger people often today will hang out in groups, where they don't date per se. I'm not talking about everybody, but I'm talking about some people, usually will hang out in groups and do that. So their perspective on having casual sex is very okay, in their minds, in the way that they feel about it. Of course, we have a lot of problems with disease, so hopefully more and more people are educated about that.
All right, and the last question: how do you welcome your new spouse's past financial debt?
Huh?
Say that again.
How do you welcome your new spouse's past financial debt?
Financial debt?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that relates to sex, but
It's a little off the subject.
Okay, okay. How do you welcome your new spouse's financial debt?
You don't.
Yeah, you don't welcome it. You just say it is what it is. Okay, I think that that if a couple is going to get married, it could be any couple and it could be any amount of debt. So people that have a lot of money usually will have a prenuptial agreement. People who don't first of all, they need to talk about it and they need to discuss it. And then the person who doesn't have the debt, I would think, needs to think a little bit about, if I want this man or this woman in my life, how are we going to manage this debt so we can get out of it, so that we can move forward in the relationship? That's the best way. Communication.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And our next questioner makes his way down.
With cohabitation so high, do you think the common law rules will start to change?
Every state has different laws with regard to common law marriage. California does not have common law marriage anymore. They used to, but they don't have it any longer. It could change. I suppose that it could change. It seems like that might be likely after a while, especially if, like I said before, the idea of traditional marriage lessens and more people just go into coupledom, so to speak.
And for our audience, my understanding, common law means if you've lived together for a certain long time, you're automatically married. Is that correct?
The state considers you to be married.
I think it's 7 years or something like that.
Used to be 7 years, yeah.
Okay, my next question. Should the government have a say-so in gay and lesbian marriages?
Okay, so you're asking my opinion?
Yeah, your personal opinion.
Oh, okay. No, I don't think that the government should have a say in it.
Okay.
Pretty cut and dry.
Well, do you think in the future that marriage would become obsolete, or will they go like like changes the way marriage is kind of constructed?
And you kind of spoke to that earlier, that we might see an evolution of sorts.
Yeah, I do think that, first of all, I think that people still want to be together. You know, couples, you fall in love with somebody, you like somebody, you want to be with them. You know, you want to get to know them. Companionship is really, really important, especially as you progress in years. It becomes very, very important to have someone that you have shared interests with, somebody that you respect, somebody that you can develop really good communication with. I do think that with women becoming more comfortable with being on their own. I mean, there are many women today that will have a baby without the benefit of having a physical male partner. They will just go to a sperm bank and look at the description of, you know, what's collected in that sperm and go for it. And so they can do that today. So I think we are going to have changes. I don't know that marriage will ever really become completely obsolete. I just think that there will be many different types possibly of marriage, but I think we're always going to have, you know, couples.
You mentioned earlier open marriages, and I've shared in lectures that my research, from what I understand, in the 60s, open marriages were popular, and the idea that, you know, I'm married, but, you know, I can have sex with other people, and so can my partner. Does that work?
It didn't in the 60s.
I know it didn't, right. But you say it still happens today. So.
Some people are comfortable with it. You know, they may have a really secure relationship with one another. I mean, think about movie stars, for example. They are put in situations over and over again, many of them, especially leading roles, where they have to kiss, they have to do sexual scenes, they're naked in front of one another, you know, they are on the set for long periods of time, or they have to travel to other countries with each other. I personally think, I don't know for sure, but I think that a lot of them have agreements. You know, I may have sex with somebody outside, but it has nothing to do with my connection with you. And so I think that those relationships can work if both parties are in agreement that that's okay with them, and they feel really secure with one another.
Okay, that's it.
And we have one more questioner to make her way down. And then after we've heard from this person's group, if anyone else has a question, just move on over to the microphone and ask that question, and before we conclude today's forum. Go ahead.
With adultery being a negative topic, why do you think people are so interested in it? I mean, you said you see it on TV, you see it on magazines, and there are clearly TV shows like Maury and Jerry Springer who deal with nothing but. Why do you think people are so interested in it if it's so negative?
Sex is a primal instinct that human beings have. You know, it's intriguing. People I think, are especially interested in stories that have to do with infidelity, or even get involved with other people or have sex with other people outside of their marriage, because it's taboo. There's something exciting about taboo. It's like dangerous, you know, and can we get away with it? Okay. There's a secrecy component which is involved with it. I mean, think back to the time when you were a little kid and you had a secret. You know, first thing you wanted to do is tell your best friend. But what did you always say to your best friend? Don't tell anybody this, okay? Yeah. And what was the first thing the best friend did? Go and tell somebody else, you know. Well, secrecy and taboo aspect, there's an excitement to it. There's a kind of passion to it. And so it's a natural drive. It's like hunger almost, you know, for people to want to experience that. So I think that's why it's very appealing to a lot of people. Plus, we like gossip.
This is true. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Did anyone else want to ask a question before we go ahead?
Have you had any religious criticism about any elements of the book?
Religious criticism about it? I do cover spirituality, and I do cover sacred marriage, is the way that's how it's referred to. Mm-hmm. And I do give opinions from some prominent people in the book about their perspective on marriage. I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
I think I know what. Have you had reactions from the religious community to your book? I mean, and I don't know if it's the title that might be suggesting that you're saying, hey, you're not saying it's okay, but it's almost like, but it is okay. I mean, don't be down on yourself if this happens.
To the contrary, I have had religious people and pastors, ministers welcome it, actually, to be something that people could actually talk about more, or actually to help. This is a kind of book that can be used not only by students, but by therapists and by spiritual counselors who can use the research and the information which is there to deal with situations that come up, because certainly their parishioners have those problems too. So yeah, I haven't had criticism.
Good question.
But
Thank
let me make one mention. I'll tell you a little story of something that happened to me in writing this book. Because sometimes people ask me if I have gotten negative criticism about the book. As soon as I had published the book, it went on Amazon, it went on Barnes and Noble, and when I wrote the book, about 4 days after it had gotten on Amazon, I went back. I had had a couple of like really nice reviews on it, and you know, Amazon gives you stars for it, so there were 5 stars for the book. And then I went to go and look to see if there was a new one, you know, if there was a new one out. And all of a sudden, I saw that I had dropped from 5 stars to 1 star, and I thought, what happened? And I started reading these horrible reviews that were on there. You know, people were going like, "This is the worst book I've ever read," and somebody wrote, "I saw this book on somebody's coffee table, and I picked it up and I read it cover to cover." This is 4 days after it was published, right? And I'm thinking, something's crazy. Some people were criticizing me, you know, or saying bad things about me, stuff like that. And all of a sudden I get an email from a guy in England, nobody I know. He writes me and he says, "I just want to let you know that there's a website called Reddit." Is anybody familiar with Reddit? Okay, it's an international site where people can write in about different issues, or sometimes they pose a problem on there and people write about that. Well, this guy had written into Reddit, and he said he was from Brazil, and he wrote that his girlfriend had cheated on him, and she had done this and she had done that. And he got so mad at her that he took all her clothes and all her possessions, threw them over the balcony, down into the street from their apartment, and she wrote a book, and then he attached the link to my book. So these people thought that I was his girlfriend and that I had written this book. So they didn't read the book or anything. They just, and then this guy from England did a screenshot of this page. So you could see where a bunch of men joined in and they said, "Hey, bro, you know, do you want us to blast the book? We can make it so that nobody will ever buy this book." And a bunch of people, you know, jumped on the bandwagon and they did that. I was really relieved to know that that's what had happened, but I was really bummed out that my stars went down to like 1. And then people started writing in, so now I think it's up to like 4. But, you know, that kind of thing can happen, and that's part of, you know, the internet and life in the big time, I guess.
Right. So any other questions? And if anyone else has a question, go ahead and move on over now, and so we'll make sure we don't leave you out.
Why do you think guys would like to look at other pictures of girls when they're in a relationship? Like, you know, like porn.
Okay. That, I think what you're saying is it dishonest, or is it cheating to look at pictures of other people or fantasize about other people when you're going with somebody? And my answer to that is definitely no. I mean, that would be like taking your brain and sticking it in a cardboard box and taping it up and shoving it under the bed and putting it in a sealed room forever. We can't make our brains do that. You know, it's like it's very normal and very natural. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be having sex with your partner and call out the name of the person you're fantasizing about. Okay, you don't want to do that. But basically, just because you're on a diet doesn't mean that you can't take a look at the menu. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, there may be, wouldn't there be some religious leaders who disagree with what you just said?
I don't know.
And I don't know enough about religion to say that, but is the thought of adultery, is that adultery?
I don't consider it. Okay. I personally do not. I think, and again, from a psychological perspective, that's kind of crazy. You can't just tell your mind, think about it. I don't want anybody in the room, and this is common, to think about a pink elephant. Do not think about a pink elephant right now. I don't want anybody to get an image in your mind of a pink elephant. Everybody does.
Right.
Okay, because how can you keep from doing that? So I can't put myself in the position of a minister or a pastor or of somebody in a religious position who would say, that's adultery if you think about that person. What was it, Jimmy Carter, who said, I lusted in my heart,
Right.
Kind of thing. How can you not, I don't think you can.
Right.
I don't think you can do it.
Concludes questions from the audience. I want to also touch on clear transitions,
Okay.
because, and this is something you're currently involved in as well. So what are the driving goals and methods, philosophy, and desired outcomes of clear transitions? We use, in our course here in family communication, we use the Galvin text, and it does conclude with suggesting therapy for couples and families. So I just wanted to, touch on that and see
Sure.
what are you doing with clear transitions? What's that?
Okay.
What is that about?
Well, I was in private practice for a long time, as I think you know if you read the book, and I stopped doing private practice back in 2001. And after that, though, I became very interested in life and wellness coaching. Now, coaching is an area that is not licensed, so really, Greg could say, well, I taught a class in family communication, I think I'll become a coach, and he could do that. Okay, so if you go to a coach, you certainly want to check out their background and what their experience is, their knowledge, etc., especially if you're looking for help having to do with a relationship. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of people who can't give good advice, because maybe they do. But Clear Transitions is a life and wellness coaching. So I took the knowledge and information that I have basically learned and experienced over those years into the process of coaching. Coaching is done on the telephone. Okay, you don't meet people person to person. You talk with an individual and you basically help them in a format that's like guiding them so that they come to conclusions and determination and understanding for themselves, as opposed to, for example, saying something like, and hopefully therapists don't do this, but instead of saying, you should do this, or this is what you need to do, you don't use that kind of a format. So it's very similar to counseling, except that you ask questions of that individual and bring them into an ability to be able to solve their issues and make decisions for themselves. And that's what it is.
And are these folks free to contact you, or is this something that you
yes, they can
offer? Okay.
I do offer it. It's relatively expensive, so I don't know if you want to do that, but it is another way to be able to go rather than going into face-to-face counseling sessions. It does work very effectively on the phone. You can be anywhere. I have talked with people sitting in their car during their lunch break. And what I do is I do follow-up questions and suggestions of things that they can try or that information they can look at by sending them emails. So I always do a follow-up email after the session. And that's an easier way to remember what happened and what you talked about during the session as well. So yes, they could do that.
Okay, and that brings us to the perfect final question then. Are there any clear guidelines that you can offer new couples regarding the issue of monogamy? I mean, without knowing them, is there any way you can bottom line this for us?
I actually wrote down a couple of things for that kind of an area if it came up, and what I said was that first of all, you want to know yourself. It's really good to take a class, either a psychology class or a class like interpersonal communication, which deals with self-esteem, self-awareness, self-concept, self-worth, and really get a handle on yourself. But your expectations in a relationship are really important. What you expect of yourself and what you expect of your partner. Also, take a family communication class. It covers all kinds of things having to do with marriage and having to do with relationships way before getting married. Other things that I wrote down were consider premarital counseling and communicate openly and honestly with your partner. have shared interests. I mentioned that before. You don't have to do everything that your partner likes to do or have exactly the same thing, but you do want to have some things that you both like to do together, and you have to be willing to do some of the things that your partner likes to do, and vice versa. And then finally, I said, I wrote, seek professional help if you get to that point and you really need it. And then again, be willing to speak very openly and very honestly with your partner, especially about sex. It's important to talk about sex because you need to know what your partner needs, wants, expects, and vice versa. And then if you're on two different pages, you need to come to some kind of compromise between the two of you that's going to work for you, or experiment, and not necessarily outside the relationship.
Dr. Gold, this has been a real honor. I want to thank our media services. Tim, thank you for setting this up and for helping us do this today. And I appreciate you spending time with us and talking to us about your book. The name of the book is Adultery is Universal. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a nice hand for Dr. Freddie Gold?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it.
And look at that, right on. So you moderators, you remember, this is how it works. You end on time, you start on time, okay?